Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're heading back to the late Cretaceous period.
That's right.
But this time our focus is on India and, well, a genuinely puzzling dinosaur,
Oh,
Brachypodosaurus.
definitely puzzling. We're really getting into the story of a creature that's been, you know, kind of shrouded in uncertainty since it was first described.
Okay,
So we'll be looking at the original paper on Brachypodosaurus, that's from 1934,
right.
and also the scientific discussions that came later, which have really questioned, where does it fit,
Yeah.
if anywhere?
In the dinosaur family tree, you mean? Or even if it's a valid genus at all.
Exactly. So our mission, if you like, for this deep dive is to understand what we actually know about this short-footed lizard.
Which is maybe not a lot.
Well, we'll see. And why it's such a headache for paleontologists and maybe what this whole saga tells us about, how challenging piecing together the ancient world can be.
So this is your shortcut, your fast track, to understanding a pretty captivating paleontological mystery. Okay, let's kick off right at the start. The discovery itself. In 1934, you mentioned Dhirendra Kishore Chakravarti.
Yep, D.K. Chakravarti. He published his work on a fossil found at Chota Simla Hill in India.
And back then, our picture of Ornithischians, those are the bird-hip dinosaurs from India, was, well, pretty fuzzy, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Really limited. The only other ornithischian that had been named from the region was Lametasaurus. That was back in 1924.
Lomatosaurus, right.
But even its status, its identification as a stegosaur, was already shaky.
Ah.
Chakravarti himself actually questioned it, suggested it might not even be an ornithischian.
So finding a new potential bird-hip dinosaur, that would have been a big deal.
A very big deal at the time, yes.
And this new fossil, Brachypodosaurus, it was found in the same basic rock layers as Lametasaurus, the Lameta Formation.
That's right, the Lameta Formation. Think of it like a stack of rock layers from roughly the same time period.
But in a slightly different layer within that stack.
Exactly. Chakravarti specifically noted the Brachypodosaurus fossil was found about 50 to 60 feet higher up in the strata,
Okay, higher up.
higher than where the Lametasaurus bits were found.
And what did that difference in stratigraphic position, its place in the layers, suggest?
While it hinted that maybe Brachypodosaurus lived slightly later, still late Cretaceous, but perhaps a bit further along in time than Lametasaurus.
Interesting. So what was this fossil that Chakravarti found? Just the one piece?
Just one bone, yes.
Yeah.
Which Chakravarti identified as a humerus, the upper arm bone.
Okay, a humerus.
And based on that, he came up with the name, Brachypodosaurus.
Which means?
From the Greek, it translates roughly as short-footed lizard.
Short-footed lizard, okay.
And the species name he gave it was gravis, which is Latin for heavy.
Heavy, short-footed lizard. Got it. And the actual specimen, the holotype?
That's cataloged as IMV9. It's the original bone used for the description.
And based on the single humerus, Chakravarti thought stegosaur.
Yes, he interpreted Brachypodosaurus as an armored dinosaur, specifically placing it within Stegosauria. Yeah, the group with the plates and the thagamizers.
Right. What made him think that from just an arm bone?
Well, he noted a prominent ridge, a crest on the bone, that he felt was similar to a feature you sometimes see on Stegosaur humeri.
But as often happens in paleontology, that initial idea didn't really stick, did it?
No, it didn't. Later analyses, people looking at the bone again,
Yeah.
brought up some pretty significant problems with identifying it as a humerus at all.
Oh. Like what?
Well, for starters, the bone is really quite flat. A typical humerus has a more, rounded shaft cross-section.
Okay, flatness. What else?
There's also that ridge, the crest Chakravarti mentioned. It's kind of on the wrong side, or at least on the side opposite to where you'd typically expect the main crest, the delta pectoral crest, on a humerus.
Weird.
And there's more. It doesn't really show the characteristic twisting along its length that you normally see in an upper arm bone.
No torsion.
Right. Plus, it's very sort of constricted, pinched in above and below these ridges. And maybe most importantly,
Yes.
it doesn't have a clear caput that's the rounded ball part that fits into the shoulder socket.
Ah, crucial.
And no clear condyles. Those are the knuckle-like bits at the bottom that connect to the forearm bones.
Okay, so if it's lacking all those key humerus features,
Then calling it a humerus becomes really problematic.
which means the whole stegosaur classification kind of falls apart too, right? If the identification of the bone itself is wrong.
Exactly. If it's not a humerus, or at least not a typical one, then the main reason for calling it a stegosaur disappears.
And were there other stegosaur features?
No, that's the other thing. Beyond the issues with the humerus ID, The fossil just doesn't show any other unique skeletal features, what paleontologists call syndapomorphies.
The defining characteristics.
Right, the specific traits that would definitively place it within Stegosauria.
Okay.
So scientists started looking for other possibilities.
Okay, so maybe not a stegosaur, but perhaps still some kind of armored dinosaur.
That was the next logical thought. The bigger group Thyreophora includes both the stegosaurs and their cousins, the ankylosaurs.
Ah, the really heavily armored ones, like tanks.
Yep, often with bony plates fused into their skin, sometimes tail clubs. And importantly, ankylosaurs were definitely around in the late Cretaceous.
So Brachypodosaurus became a maybe ankylosaur.
It became a potential candidate, yes. An indeterminate Thyreophoran, possibly an ankylosaurian.
And it's a big but, isn't it? They still only had that one single confusing bone.
Precisely. That's the massive obstacle. Because this single, potentially misidentified bone is the only fossil ever assigned to Brachypodosaurus.
Which leads to
It eventually led to it being formally declared a nomen dubium.
a dubious name.
Literally, yes. It means there just isn't enough reliable fossil evidence to confidently classify it, or even to be sure it represents a distinct, unique genus. We can't diagnose it properly.
So the takeaway isn't just about Brachypodosaurus being confusing, but about how little evidence we sometimes have.
Absolutely. It really highlights how limited fossil finds can stop us, or at least make it incredibly difficult, to confidently understand prehistoric life.
And things got even murkier, didn't they, when considering the bigger picture of dinosaurs in that part of the world?
They did. There was a study in 2004 by Matthew Lameta and some colleagues.
Okay.
They looked at the fossil record and suggested that it was actually unlikely that any Ornithischian dinosaurs lived in Africa after the Cenomanian age.
Which overlaps with the late Cretaceous, when Brachypodosaurus supposedly lived in India.
Right. Now, India and Africa were separate landmasses then, drifting apart. But this assessment still casts, let's say, further doubt on finding definitive bird-hip dinosaurs in the Indian late Cretaceous, especially based on the kind of fragmentary fossils we often find.
It adds another layer of skepticism.
It does. It makes you scrutinize finds like Brachypodosaurus even more closely.
And didn't this context also bring another supposed Indian stegosaur into question? You mentioned Lametasaurus earlier, but wasn't there another one?
Yes, exactly. Dravidosaurus.
Dravidosaurus.
Another taxon named from India, also initially called a stegosaur.
Yeah.
But its validity has also been, well, seriously questioned.
How so?
There's actually a strong suggestion, published by other researchers, that the remains assigned to Dravidosaurus might not be dinosaurian at all.
Not dinosaur. Then what?
Possibly plesiosaur, a marine reptile.
Wow, okay. That's quite a mix-up.
It really is, and it just underscores the difficulties, the potential pitfalls, especially in those earlier days of paleontology, working with limited, sometimes poorly preserved or misidentified fossils. It's tough.
So if we sort of zoom out now, try to summarize the journey of Brachypodosaurus, what are the key things to grasp?
Well, I think the key thing is seeing the scientific process in action. You have an initial discovery, Chakravarty's interpretation as a stegosaur humerus.
Right.
Then comes subsequent analysis, closer looks, comparisons. People raise doubts about the bone's identity, about the classification.
The reevaluation.
Exactly. And because the evidence, that single bone, is so scarce and ambiguous, it ends up in this dubious name category, nomen dubium.
It really shows how our understanding evolves, or sometimes how it just hits a wall because of the limits of the fossil record.
Perfectly put. It's shaped and sometimes limited by exactly what the rocks give us.
And it certainly highlights a gap in our knowledge about the dinosaurs of the Indian subcontinent during that whole late Cretaceous period.
It absolutely does. The
Yeah.
Lameta Formation, it's famous for some amazing finds, big sauropods, meat-eating theropods like Brachiosaurus.
Yeah.
But the story of the Ornithischians there, it's still very, very unclear. And Brachypodosaurus is just exhibit A for that uncertainty.
So we're left with this short-footed lizard
Huh.
that, well, might not have had short feet, certainly wasn't a lizard in the modern sense, and whose very existence as a distinct dinosaur genus is, well, it's up in the air.
That's a spot-on summary. Brachypodosaurus is still an enigma. And it's such a powerful reminder, isn't it? How just one incomplete, maybe even misidentified fossil can spark literally decades of scientific debate.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How many other secrets are still locked away in those rocks? in the Lameta Formation or similar fossil beds around the globe.
Mhm.
How many other discoveries are waiting that could just completely shift our view of the prehistoric world, all based on these, sometimes frustrating but always fascinating clues?
It's true. And considering Brachypodosaurus, you have to wonder, what biases might we have right now about other extinct animals based on similarly incomplete finds?
That's a really provocative thought. Are we making assumptions based on fragments elsewhere?
It's certainly possible. The Brachypodosaurus story is, I think, a really valuable lesson in just how tentative scientific knowledge can be sometimes. It's always a process of refinement, isn't it? As new evidence hopefully comes to light.
So maybe, just maybe, future finds in India might finally give us some clearer answers about this mysterious, heavy, short-footed lizard.
We can hope. Maybe one day we'll know for sure what IFV9 really was. Until then, it remains a fantastic puzzle.